Mark Evans had been a park ranger for 5 years, and in that time he'd learned that the woods had their own kind of silence, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched. That was why, when the call came through on the old radio, just as he was about to clock out, something in his gut twisted. "Ranger HQ, this is..." The voice on the line crackled with static. "Emergency, please, it's coming back, I need..." The transmission cut out. Mark frowned, grabbing the receiver. "This is Ranger Evans. Who is this? What's your location?" Nothing but static. He leaned over the dispatch desk and checked the radio logs. No outgoing calls. His supervisor, Ranger Beckett, looked up from his coffee. "You hear that?" Mark asked. "Hear what?" "There was a distress call." Beckett sighed, setting his cup down. "That old radio picks up all kinds of weird interference. Probably some local trucker's CB." "No," Mark insisted. "It was a ranger. I heard him." Beckett glanced at the clock. "Mark, your shift's over. Go home." Mark opened his map and punched in the coordinates from the garbled transmission. His brow furrowed. The location was deep in the forest, off any marked trails. More concerning, there was no ranger shack listed there. "Did we ever have a station out in this sector?" Mark asked. Beckett shook his head. "Never." Mark hesitated. Every part of his training told him to log it and move on. But that voice, the sheer panic in it, stuck with him. If there was even the slightest chance someone needed help, he had to check. "Mark," Beckett warned as he grabbed his jacket, "you go chasing ghosts in the woods. Don't expect me to come looking for you." Mark shot him a smirk. "Wouldn't want you to get lost, old man." As he stepped outside, the cold evening air bit at his face. The sky had turned an eerie shade of purple, the last light of the sun bleeding into the treetops. He climbed into his truck, put the coordinates into his GPS, and frowned. No roads available. Mark exhaled sharply. Figures. It didn't matter. He knew these woods better than anyone. He'd just have to drive as far as he could and hike the rest. As he pulled onto the dirt road leading into the forest, his radio crackled again. A voice. His own voice. "You shouldn't have come." The drive stretched longer than it should have. The deeper Mark went, the more the road narrowed, as if the forest itself were trying to squeeze him out. His headlights cut through the thickening mist, illuminating the gnarled branches above, like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Finally, the road ended in a tangled mess of underbrush. He killed the engine, stepped out, and pulled out his flashlight. The air here felt different. Too still. Mark checked his GPS again. The coordinates were still another half-mile ahead. No trails, no paths, just trees. He pressed forward, boots crunching against the damp earth. With each step, the woods seemed to tighten around him. The trees grew closer, their trunks twisted in unnatural ways. The silence was absolute. No wind, no chirping insects. Even his own footsteps sounded muffled. Then he saw it, the shack. It stood in a small clearing, a single-room structure rotting from the inside out. The wooden planks were warped with age, the roof sagging, as if the forest had long since tried to reclaim it. But what caught his attention were the claw marks. Deep, jagged gouges carved across the door and walls, some as high as the roof. Mark swallowed hard, stepping closer. Symbols were scratched into the wood, overlapping like desperate warnings. He ran his fingers over one, the grooves rough and splintered. His flashlight flickered, the air shifted. From inside the shack, a radio crackled to life. Mark's blood went cold. It was the same voice from before. "Ranger HQ, this is..." Static. "Emergency, please, it's coming back, I need..." The message looped, again and again. Mark inhaled sharply, stepping onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight. He reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then pushed inside. The smell hit him first, a mix of damp wood, rust, and something sour, like meat left too long in the sun. The room was small and empty except for an old cot in the corner and a dust-covered desk. The radio sat on top, its speaker crackling. Mark stepped closer. The radio's dials were rusted solid, the power cord cut. It shouldn't be playing. And yet, the message continued. Then it changed. "If you found this, you're already too late." The looping stopped. The radio clicked off, and outside something moved. Mark froze. Outside something shifted in the darkness. The trees creaked, but there was no wind, just the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. His grip tightened on his flashlight as he swept the beam across the shack's interior. Dust floated through the air, disturbed by his presence. He turned back toward the radio, his heart thudding against his ribs. That voice, it had changed. The first part was the distress call, but that last sentence, that was for him. Mark swallowed hard and forced himself to focus. There had to be a record of whoever was stationed here, a reason for the call. His eyes landed on a wooden desk pushed against the far wall. Yellowed papers were scattered across it. Some crumbled at the edges, others warped from moisture. He picked one up and squinted at the handwriting. Ranger Log, October 3rd, 1971. Something's wrong. It comes at night. I don't know how long I've been here. The maps were wrong, the roads. The rest of the page had been scratched out. Mark flipped through more pages. Each log was written by a different hand, spanning decades. But they all mention the same things. If you hear it, do not answer. It mimics. It wears your face. Don't open the door. Some of the final entries were frantic, the handwriting barely legible. It knows my name. Mark's breath hitched. He checked the bottom of the log books, looking for signatures. But the names, he didn't recognize any of them. His stomach tightened. He'd worked these woods for 5 years. He knew every ranger on staff, past and present. But these names, they weren't in any records. A sharp thud rattled the walls. Mark jolted, his breath catching. He turned toward the door, listening. Silence. Then another thud. Closer. Something dragged across the wood outside. A slow, deliberate sound, like nails carving into the planks. Mark took a slow step back, his pulse hammering. His radio hissed with static again. Then from the other side of the door. Mark, a voice, his voice. The doorknob rattled. Mark's blood ran cold. Outside, his own voice whispered, almost pleading. Mark, let me in. He stared at the door, his entire body locked in place. Then from behind him, a floorboard creaked. Mark spun around, his flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing, but the floorboard had creaked. His breath came shallow, sharp. The shack was too small for anything to be hiding. Just a cot, a desk, and empty walls. No closets, no attic, nowhere to go. And yet he wasn't alone. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. Mark, let me in. The voice was wrong now, too flat, too hollow, like a bad recording of himself played just a little too slow. Mark clenched his jaw and backed toward the desk, heart hammering. His fingers brushed something, a rusted hunting knife, blade dull with time. He snatched it up, gripping the handle tight. The thing outside shifted, pacing the length of the shack. The wood creaked under its weight. His flashlight flickered, then a sharp knock at the window. Mark's stomach twisted. Slowly, he turned his head toward the small, dust-covered window beside the cot. The glass was filthy, smeared with age. The light from his flashlight barely cut through the grime. But beyond the window, just at the edge of the glass, something moved, a shadow. Tall, wrong. Then his own face stared back at him. Mark's breath hitched. The thing outside, it wasn't a perfect copy. The smile was too wide, the eyes too dark, too deep, like looking into something wearing a human mask, something that hadn't quite figured out how a person was supposed to look. It raised one hand, fingers splayed. The nails were longer than they should be. Blackened at the tips, it pressed them against the glass. Tap, tap. Mark gritted his teeth. No, he wasn't playing this game. He grabbed his radio, hands slick with sweat, and pressed the call button. HQ, this is Ranger Evans. I need immediate assistance at coordinates. Static. Then his own voice answered, Help me. Mark went cold. The thing outside was on the radio. The message looped, his voice, over and over. A shadow passed across the window. The thing was moving, circling the shack again. Mark tightened his grip on the knife. His only way out was through that door. But if he opened it, a new sound. From the ceiling, a slow, deliberate scratch. It was above him. Mark's breath came fast and shallow. The scratching above him, slow, deliberate, sent ice crawling up his spine. The shack was old, but the roof wasn't that high. Something was up there, something big. He turned his flashlight toward the ceiling. The old wooden planks groaned, bowing inward slightly as if something heavy was shifting its weight. Then a single knock. Not on the door, not on the window, from inside the ceiling. Mark swallowed the bile rising in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, but where? The door led to the thing outside. The only window was too small to squeeze through. His radio crackled again. "Help me." His own voice. Mark clenched his teeth. No, it wasn't him. It wasn't real. Then, a whisper right above his head. "Which one of us gets to leave?" Mark didn't hesitate. He lunged for the desk and flipped it over, shoving it beneath the door handle. The wood groaned as he braced his back against it, hands gripping the rusted knife so hard his knuckles ached. Silence. For a moment, nothing. Then a loud splintering crack. The ceiling buckled inward. Wood rained down, dust choking the air. Mark threw up an arm to shield his face, coughing as he scrambled away. Something dropped onto the cot. Mark's stomach twisted as he saw it up close. It looked just like him, but the skin was stretched too tight. The fingers were too long, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it had never quite learned how necks were supposed to work. The thing grinned. Mark stumbled back, breath ragged. The thing moved with him. A half-step delay, like a reflection lagging behind. "You took too long, Mark," it said. "You were supposed to leave before midnight." Mark's stomach lurched. The logs, the warnings. He checked his watch. 11:59. The radio screeched. "Which one of us gets to leave?" The thing lunged. Mark dove to the side, slamming into the wall as the cot crumpled beneath the creature's weight. He scrambled to his feet, knife shaking in his grip. His only way out was through the door. The thing laughed. "Go on," it said in his voice. "Run." Mark kicked the desk aside and bolted into the night. The cold night air hit Mark like a slap as he sprinted away from the shack, his boots pounding against the uneven ground. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning. The trees blurred around him, dark shapes twisting in his periphery. Behind him, the shack door slammed open. Mark didn't look back, couldn't. Something was following him. He could hear it moving, not running, just walking, but fast. Too fast for walking, as if the space between them was shrinking without it needing to try. His radio crackled. "Mark," his own voice, "you're going the wrong way." Mark gritted his teeth and kept running. His brain screamed at him to make sense of it, but none of this made sense. The warnings in the logbooks. "If you hear it, do not answer. It mimics, it wears your face. Don't open the door." He had already broken the last one. His foot caught on a root, and he crashed forward, hitting the ground hard. His flashlight flew from his grip, bouncing once before rolling to a stop in the dirt, its beam pointing toward the trees. Mark groaned, pushing himself up. His arms were scraped, his knees screaming in protest. He reached for the flashlight. A boot stepped into the beam of light. Mark's breath hitched. The leg attached to the boot was his. The torn ranger pants, the same scuffed-up work boots. Slowly he lifted his gaze. There he was, his own face, staring down at him, a smile stretched too wide. "Tired?" it asked. Mark scrambled back, kicking away from the thing wearing his skin. The creature tilted its head in that unnatural way, watching him. Mark's shaking fingers found the handle of the rusted knife. "You know the rules," the thing said, stepping closer. Its voice had a slight distortion, like a recording being played on an old tape. "Only one of us gets to leave." Mark's fingers tightened around the knife. The thing crouched, its face inches from his. "Make it count." Then it lunged. Mark rolled aside, the creature's hand slamming into the dirt where he had been. He pushed to his feet and ran again, but this time he wasn't just running blind. The old ranger logs, there had to be more, a way to survive. His only option was to get back to the shack and find out what the last ranger did to escape. Mark didn't stop running. His lungs burned, legs screamed, but he didn't dare slow down. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The shack, the warnings, the thing wearing his face, and the voice, his own voice, crackling through the radio like an echo from somewhere he wasn't supposed to hear. Ahead, through the thick trees, the shack reappeared. His stomach twisted. He had just run away from it. It should be miles behind him. But there it was, waiting. The thing was toying with him. Mark skidded to a stop, panting. Behind him the forest was silent. No footsteps, no movement. He wasn't stupid. That thing was still out there, watching. Mark gritted his teeth and forced himself forward. The rules, he had to find them, had to know what the last ranger did to escape. He stepped onto the porch and pushed the door open. The shack was different. Before it had been empty. Now the desk was upright again. The papers were neatly stacked, the radio silent. The only thing out of place was the smell. A new scent, coppery, blood. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as he moved toward the desk. The logs were open to the last page. His eyes scanned the page, heart hammering. "I didn't make it out." The words froze him in place. Then below that, in a different hand, written in bold, jagged letters. "Only one of us gets to leave." Mark staggered back, stomach twisting. No, that wasn't possible. A thump sounded behind him. He turned. The thing was inside. It stood in the doorway, hunched like it had to squeeze its two long limbs through. Its grin was too wide, too human trying to be human. Mark raised the knife. The thing laughed, a sound like his own laugh, but wrong. "That won't help," it said. Mark's grip tightened. The thing stepped closer. Mark backed up until his legs hit the desk. The papers fluttered. Then he saw it. A final, hastily scribbled note. "If it looks like you don't fight, you'll lose. But if you see it first..." The rest was smeared in blood. Mark's breath came in sharp bursts. He had seen it first, back in the woods, which meant his stomach turned. That was the rule. If you see it first, you're the real one. Mark's fingers dug into the knife handle. It was him or the thing. Only one of them was getting out of here. He took a deep breath and attacked. Mark lunged. The knife flashed in the dim light, but the thing was faster. It twisted, its body moving like something that had never been human in the first place. Too smooth, too fluid. It ducked under the blade, and before Mark could react, a hand shot out and clamped around his wrist. A cold hand, his own hand. Mark roared, twisting, slamming his elbow into the thing's chest. It felt too solid, too real, like hitting himself. His grip tightened on the knife, but the thing just smiled, a perfect copy of his own smile. "You still don't get it, do you?" it said. Mark drove the knife forward. The blade sank deep, and the thing laughed. Not in pain, not in anger, like he had just told it a joke. Mark ripped the knife free. The thing didn't bleed. The wound gaped open, skin peeled like fabric, but there was nothing inside, just darkness. Mark stumbled back, stomach twisting. The thing cocked its head, watching him. Then it reached up, grabbing its own face, Mark's face, and peeled it back. Beneath it, nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just a black, hollow void. Then it moved. Mark barely had time to react before the thing lunged. He hit the ground hard, the knife flying from his grip. The thing's hands clamped down on his shoulders, pressing him into the floor. It wasn't strong. It was exactly as strong as he was. That was the trick. It wasn't better. It was just him, which meant it could be beaten. Mark gritted his teeth, forcing his weight against it, rolling. The thing slammed onto its back, its grip breaking just enough. Mark grabbed the knife, and he saw it first. That was the rule. His knife drove downward. The thing screamed, not in sound but in his head, a deafening psychic howl that made his vision blur, but he didn't stop. Mark stabbed again, again, again. The thing's body shuddered, the hollow void where its face had been rippling like liquid. Then it collapsed. Mark gasped for air, rolling onto his back. His entire body trembled. It was gone. He had won. The night stretched on in silence. Then a voice. His radio crackled. Mark swallowed hard, forcing himself to listen. The words were faint, almost drowned in static, but he still recognized his own voice. "It's not me. If you see me, don't believe it." Mark lay on the floor, his chest heaving, fingers numb around the knife handle. The shack felt smaller now, the walls pressing in like something alive. The thing was gone, or at least it looked gone. His radio hissed again. "It's not me. If you see me, don't believe it." His own voice, but not from his lips. His stomach twisted. That wasn't a message meant for him. It was a warning. Mark forced himself up, legs shaking beneath him. The air inside the shack felt different now, lighter, like the weight of something unseen had been lifted. He stumbled toward the desk, eyes scanning the old ranger logs. The pages had changed. The last entry was his own handwriting. "I didn't make it out." Mark's blood went cold. That wasn't possible. He hadn't written that, had he? His fingers trembled as he flipped back through the logs, pages full of frantic, half-written entries from men who had come before him, men who were never found, and all of them ended the same way. "Only one of us gets to leave." A sudden knock at the door. Mark's breath caught. He turned, every muscle in his body locking in place. Through the small, dirty window, he saw someone standing on the porch. A ranger. The uniform was familiar. Too familiar. His own. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. His pulse pounded so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. The ranger on the porch was him, or it looked like him. The figure raised a hand, palm pressed against the glass. Its mouth moved. Mark didn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew what it was saying. "Which one of us gets to leave?" A sharp pain shot through Mark's skull, splitting behind his eyes. His vision blurred for a moment, his knees nearly buckling. He pressed a hand to his temple, gasping. Memories flooded his mind, driving here, finding the shack, the creature mimicking him, but now something was wrong. His boots were dry, his uniform wasn't torn, his hands were clean. He hadn't been in a fight, had he? The other Mark stared back at him from the window, waiting. A deep, sickening realization slithered into his brain. What if he wasn't the real one? What if he had lost? Mark swallowed hard, his hand trembling as he reached for the door. One of them had to leave, but which one? His fingers brushed the handle. Outside, the other Mark smiled. Mark's hand hovered over the door handle, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Outside, his own face watched him. The smile was patient, expectant. "One of us gets to leave." His fingers twitched, but he didn't turn the knob. "Not yet. Think, damn it, the rules, the warnings. If you see it first, you're the real one." But he had seen it first, hadn't he? His mind swam with doubt. He tried to retrace the night, but the details felt loose, like puzzle pieces forced into the wrong spaces. He remembered killing the thing, felt the knife sinking in. But if he'd won, why was it still standing outside? The radio crackled. A new voice this time. "HQ, this is Ranger Evans. I'm on scene." Mark's stomach lurched. It wasn't coming from the radio inside the shack. It was coming from his truck. A second voice answered. "Beckett." "Copy, Evans. You find anything?" Mark's pulse slammed against his ribs. The other Mark, the one outside, pressed his palm to the window. "That's me," Mark whispered. "I already made the call." But he hadn't. He couldn't have. His hands shook as he looked around the shack. The bloody pages, the knife still slick with something that wasn't quite blood. Had he really escaped, or was he already part of it? The radio crackled again. "HQ, no sign of anyone out here, just an old shack, probably a false report." A long silence, then Beckett's voice. "Understood, come on back." Mark's vision blurred, his head throbbed. The other Mark reached for the doorknob from the outside, and this time Mark didn't stop him. The door swung open. Cold night air rushed in. Mark stepped forward, his boots met the damp earth, solid and real. He turned toward the woods, toward the distant glow of his truck's headlights. The voice on the radio called him back. The shack stood silent behind him, then the door slammed shut. Mark froze. He turned, his heart hammering. The shack was gone. Nothing remained but a clearing of dead grass and clawed dirt. No logs, no radio, no second Mark. The night stretched quiet and deep. A cold chill worked its way into Mark's bones, but he forced his legs forward. He reached his truck, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the wheel. His hands felt steady, real. The voice on the radio spoke again. "HQ, this is Ranger Evans. Heading back now." Mark's lips curled into a small, too-wide smile. He started the engine and drove away. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.